Joining me now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer, a member of the Senate Banking, Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, and Environment and Public Works Committees. Senator, thanks very much for being here. Good to see you this morning. Your reaction to President Biden's executive order on the border?
Well, as the saying has been used many times this week, too little, too late. But Maria, the first thing that strikes me about it is that by doing this EO, he's admitting that he could have done something about the border for the last 3.5 years and chose not to. And I equate his immigration problem sort of to his inflation problem. It's sticky because people see it cumulatively, not at today's rate or next month's rate, even if he is able to pull this off. And I frankly believe that it'll never really come to fruition anyway. I think a court probably will sort of take him off the hook, if you will, stay the decision. And so then he can say for the next 5 months, I tried my best, when the reality is he's done nothing at all.
Well, I mean, also there are people who are not included in the order, right? If you're an unaccompanied child, it's okay. You still get to come in. That's not included in the 2,500 cap.
Right.
If you claim that you are a victim of severe trafficking, there are all these other areas where I think this could probably be misused. Is that not right?
That's absolutely right, Maria. And there's a loophole for every rule.
Yeah.
And in fact, in some cases, he has 2 or 3 loopholes for every rule. So I don't think it's, first of all, a serious effort at all. He's irredeemable on the topic, in my view. Again, for 3.5 years, you welcome 10 million people in here illegally. Many of them turn out to be violent criminals, human traffickers, drug traffickers. We know all of the problems, including the costs. And then he comes up with this very minimalist sort of executive order that really isn't as minimalist as it appears on the surface, just trying to market himself back into redeemability, like I say, for the last 5 months prior to an election. It's so transparent. And by the way, it's equally transparent to his very angry base, who now has one more reason to not like Joe Biden or to mistrust him.
Well, I mean, it is transparent to us because we talk about it every day. Lee Carter, do you think, jump in here, Lee, because you're so in touch with the polls and how people are feeling. I know that this is number 1 or number 2 issue in terms of voters, but do you think people see through this to say, look, the president could have done something 3.5 years ago or for 3 years. Now, 3 years later, we have 10 million illegals in the country. And now he says he wants to cap it at 2,500 a day.
Look, for the last 3 months, the immigration has been the number one issue of the American people, and I think there's no question that Joe Biden has seen that and realizes he needs to act on it. And I think the American people are on to it. Even the New York Times today had an article saying that the American people favor Trump's policies on immigration. He's got more than a 20-point lead in the polls on the handling of immigration, and I don't think this executive order is going to do enough to change that tide. And he has tried to shift blame. He's tried to say that it's the Republicans that weren't going to make the deal, when in fact I think most people blame Joe Biden and the Democrats for the situation we're in today, because it was better under Donald Trump than it is today. And I think when you look at this executive order, a lot of people have questions. What does 2,500 mean? What is the magic of 2,500? Right. Are people going to suddenly appear? Do we have the infrastructure suddenly to deal with it at 2,500? How are we counting? I mean, if we know this many, it's absolutely, there's so many questions. It seems absurd. It seems weak, frankly. I mean, and I don't think that it's going to change the tide for him on immigration in the way that he really needs to change the tide.
Senator, if you're talking about 6, 7, 8,000 people a day, how are you going to do anything and have a cutoff point to 2,500? I mean, where are all those people going to go?
Well, it's a very important point that you make and that Lee makes, because those are the questions. And by the way, people aren't going to notice a change anyway. Even if there was a way to measure all of that, a way to like shut the gates suddenly and say, okay, no more today, we're shutting down. They don't have the infrastructure to process the numbers that they're trying to reduce it to, much less the much greater number that it will really be.
Yeah.
And again, I get back to my cumulative issue. Those 10 million people are still here illegally. Some of them are being arrested on a regular basis for violent crimes.
That's right.
Because they're living in sanctuary cities. These problems aren't going to go away in the next 5 months. The only thing that you may see is that the message gets out a little bit around the world that, he's reducing things a little bit. Maybe we're not as welcome as we are, because that is part, I think, of the draw for people, and is his his own rhetoric.
Well,
I think it's very minimal.
We just reported about the illegal who came in through Eagle Pass last year in July and just shot 2 NYPD officers. We also know that the person who killed Laken Riley was an illegal. I mean, you're seeing a real impact from this across the country. But that's not the only issue that voters have a problem with. President Biden's green agenda is also under fire. 20 Republican governors are demanding that the administration, quote, deregulate and reform American energy policy. The group writing in a joint letter, quote, to address these concerns, we call on you to pause the rhetorical and regulatory hostility toward traditional energy. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats are on the other side. They're demanding the administration go after big oil and gas executives because of a rise in gasoline prices. Senator Chuck Schumer, along with 22 other Democrats, sent a letter of their own to the DOJ, accusing top U.S. oil producers of price gouging, Senator. I mean, the market is a global market. Who's price gouging?
It's a ridiculous notion. And again, speaking of transparent issues, suddenly 3.5 years into the Biden administration, he's going to blame oil executives for his policies. Listen, the economics 101 lesson of supply and demand, supercharge the demand with free money and then restrict the supply with overregulation, is a very basic concept that most Americans know well enough to know that this is not somebody else's fault. Again, it gets back to when you think about the electoral piece of this, and I think Lee was sort of alluding to this. We all have had experience of 4 years with Donald Trump and 4 years with Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden's worst nightmare. All the rhetoric and schemes in the world are not going to change what people know by experience. Low inflation, peace, prosperity, secure border, geopolitical strength versus what we have today. Pretty basic for people.
Well, I mean, there's this new survey, and it finds nearly half of Americans are hesitant to go electric. 46% say that they're unlikely to purchase an electric vehicle, Senator, and yet they're pushing these electric vehicles down our throats, and also a lot of the components are made in China. So why are we BSing everybody that we're trying to get, supply chains out of China when, in fact, he's doubling down on them here with this move into EVs?
So this is yet one more example of the hypocrisy, the conflicting messages. I think either the intellectual dishonesty or basic corruption of favoring a particular industry, regardless of where the supply chain comes from, over an industry that they don't like. And the reality is, electric vehicles, the reason people don't want them is because skepticism is one thing, but many people, like from North Dakota, know darn well that electric vehicles don't work in really cold weather. About half the country is pretty much, if you're going to have an electric vehicle, it's a seasonal vehicle. You have to be wealthy to get one, and all that subsidizing it does is lifts the price of it so that fewer people can afford them. Not to mention, by the way, they come out with this regulation a couple of weeks ago, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which wants to federalize the entire grid in hopes that somehow that's going to be the magic bullet while they reduce the generation capacity of our country. It's so upside down and such chaos that, again, it's an irredeemable issue. When you look at the automobile industry and you look at the manufacturing, you look at the consumers, and of course you look at the dealers in the middle, they know what they want. And I think the hybrid format has worked quite well. It has naturally worked into the supply chain and into the market. Markets really do work if you let them, and these guys are just completely manipulating them.
Has the support for President Trump in the House and Senate decreased since the guilty verdict?
Oh, just the opposite. I mean, it is, we've really seen the very, very dark side of the weaponization of our justice system in New York. And, I can think of a couple of senators that I won't name, but whose support for Donald Trump, it's not so much more support for Donald Trump as it is support for a change in the weaponization of our justice system. And that comes in the form of one Donald Trump. And so it's hardened his support, in my view.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. Kevin Cramer is in.